The ballroom of the Harrington estate was a world built for wealth. Crystal chandeliers glowed above rows of champagne glasses, laughter filled the air, and a live quartet played near the grand piano in the corner. A Steinway polished so perfectly it mirrored the guests' reflections. Amelia Harrington, 38 billionaire heiress to a real estate empire, stood at the center of it all. Her reputation preceded her, smart, driven, striking, and notoriously sharp-tongued. She was used to commanding rooms like this. Everyone catered to her, laughed at her jokes, and agreed with her opinions, even when she barely noticed who was listening. It was the company's annual charity gala, the kind that cost more to host than it raised. Amelia liked the prestige, not the cause. Tonight she wore a white silk gown, her diamond earrings catching the light as she moved from guest to guest. "Music's too slow," she said to the quartet, waving her champagne flute in irritation. "Play something with life, please." "Yes." "Miss Harrington," one of the musicians said quickly, adjusting his bow. From the far end of the hall, a man in a maintenance uniform quietly emptied bins and polished the marble floors. His name was David Lawson, 45, tall and lean, with a calmness that made him seem out of place among the hurried catering staff. He worked for the building's maintenance team and had been assigned to the estate temporarily after one of the regular janitors fell ill. He moved with quiet precision, never interrupting, never drawing attention, but as he worked, his eyes occasionally drifted toward the piano in the corner. The way his gaze lingered, just for a second, carried something more than admiration, something closer to longing. When he bent down to pick up a glass someone had dropped, Amelia's assistant, Cara, approached him. "Careful with that," she whispered sharply. "We can't afford another accident tonight." David nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Cara sighed and lowered her voice. "Don't take it personally. Miss Harrington's just under pressure. She gets particular." David smiled faintly. "I've seen worse." He returned to work, moving quietly around the tables as the guests mingled. But fate, as it often does, had plans that didn't care about protocol or social boundaries. It began when the music stopped unexpectedly. One of the violinists had broken a string mid-performance, leaving an awkward silence hanging over the room. Amelia turned, annoyed. "Well, can someone fix this?" The violinist apologized, flustered, and began replacing the string, but the crowd was already murmuring. Amelia hated dead air at her events. Her eyes landed on the piano. "Someone should play something," she said impatiently. "Anything." Cara looked around helplessly. "I don't think anyone here—" "Come now," Amelia said loudly, half joking but loud enough for her guests to hear. "Surely someone in this room can play a few notes. We're not savages." A few laughed politely, but no one stepped forward. Then from behind the buffet table, someone spoke quietly. "I could," said David. The room turned. Amelia raised an eyebrow. "You?" David nodded, standing still beneath the chandelier's glow. "I can play a little, yes." The guests exchanged amused glances. Amelia smiled, not kindly but curiously, the way someone might smile at a street magician. "Is that so? And what's your name?" "David, ma'am." "David the janitor," she said lightly, sipping her champagne. "And what exactly can you play, David?" He shrugged modestly. "Whatever you'd like." Her lips curved into a challenge. "Tell you what, if you can make that crowd stop whispering and actually listen, I'll give you something better than applause." A ripple of laughter moved through the room. "What's that?" he asked calmly. She smiled, eyes gleaming with mock amusement. "I'll double your salary for a year." "How about that?" David looked at her, unreadable. "And if they don't listen, then you'll still have a job," she said with a smirk. "So nothing to lose," Cara whispered. "Amelia, maybe that's—" "It's fine," Amelia said, waving her off. "Let's have a little fun." The guests stepped aside as David walked toward the grand piano. The laughter quieted, replaced by the faint creak of his work boots on the marble floor. He removed his gloves, set them neatly on the bench, and sat down. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft rustle of his uniform as he adjusted the seat. His hands hovered over the keys, still and steady. Then he began to play. The first notes were low, gentle, deliberate, like the start of a storm building far away. His fingers moved with confidence, not rushed, not showy, but graceful. The melody grew warmer, unfolding into something both familiar and hauntingly new. It was a piece no one could name, but everyone felt. Conversations died mid-sentence. The clinking of glasses stopped. Even the air seemed to hold still. David's hands moved faster now, weaving through the keys with a mastery that defied the plainness of his uniform. His expression stayed calm, his eyes half closed as if he were somewhere far beyond the ballroom, somewhere private. When the final note fell into silence, it lingered like a held breath. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, people began to clap. The sound built into a standing ovation. Some guests even cheered. Amelia stood motionless, her eyes wide, champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Kara leaned in and whispered, "You said double his salary." Amelia didn't respond. She was still staring at him. David stood, bowed politely, and said, "Thank you for listening." Then he turned to leave, picking up his gloves. Before he could walk away, Amelia spoke. "Wait!" He stopped and looked back. She searched for words, her composure cracked for the first time all evening. "Where did you learn to play like that?" David smiled faintly. "My mother taught me before she passed. She cleaned houses. One of them had a piano. The room was silent again." Amelia's face softened. She set her glass down. "You played like someone who's lived it." He nodded once. "Music doesn't come from lessons. It comes from listening." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, his steps unhurried, his presence somehow larger than anyone else's in the room. Amelia stood there long after he'd gone, the applause fading, the crowd murmuring. For the first time in years, she didn't know what to say. The next morning, she couldn't stop thinking about him, about that music, that calm voice, that quiet dignity. For someone so used to control, it unsettled her in ways she didn't understand, and somewhere deep inside, a question began to form, one that would change everything between them. The morning after the gala, Amelia Harrington sat in her office on the top floor of the Harrington Tower. From the wide glass windows, she could see all of downtown spread below her, clean lines, steel reflections, her empire. Usually that view filled her with quiet satisfaction, but today she couldn't stop thinking about a janitor sitting at her piano. She'd hosted dozens of events, met hundreds of powerful people, and forgotten most of them by sunrise. But not him. Not the man who'd walked into her world of luxury and shattered it with nothing more than his hands on ivory keys. She replayed the moment in her mind again and again. The stillness, the emotion in the room, the way his music had silenced everything that wasn't real. She'd been to concerts in Vienna and Paris, but none of it had sounded like that. His playing wasn't perfect in the technical sense, but it was human, raw, alive. Kara entered the office with her usual efficiency, carrying a tablet. "Morning, Amelia. The press coverage from last night looks good. Donations up 12%. The performance is going viral. Someone recorded him." Amelia looked up sharply. "Recorded who?" "The janitor," Kara said. "David. Someone posted it online. Over 1 million views already." Amelia blinked. "You're kidding." "No, it's everywhere. Janitor stuns billionaire gala with piano performance." Headlines love irony. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling. "Of course they do." Kara hesitated. "Should I contact the media to control the story?" "No," Amelia said slowly. "Let it breathe." That night, after the office emptied, Amelia sat alone, scrolling through the video on her phone. The recording wasn't professional, shaky, muffled, but it captured everything that mattered. The quiet at the start, the way the music built, note by note, until the whole room fell silent. At the end, there was a close-up of David's face as he stood, humble and calm, before bowing. No pride, no showmanship, just peace. She found herself whispering, "Who are you?" The next day, she instructed the HR department to pull his file. "David Lawson," the head of HR said, "part-time maintenance. Hired through a subcontractor 2 years ago. Reliable, quiet, never late. Address?" she asked. He hesitated. "Ma'am, is there an issue?" "I just want to thank him personally," she said, her tone even but firm. A few hours later, her driver was taking her across town, far from the manicured streets of her usual circles. The buildings grew older, the roads narrower, until they reached a small apartment complex on the city's east side. Amelia stepped out, feeling oddly nervous. She wasn't used to showing up at anyone's doorstep unannounced, especially not a janitor's. She knocked once. The door opened a moment later. David stood there, surprised but composed. He was wearing a plain white shirt, sleeves rolled up, a dish towel slung over one shoulder. "Miss Harrington," he said evenly. "Didn't expect to see you here," she smiled, uncertain. "I hope this isn't inappropriate. I just wanted to thank you, and to apologize for how I treated you at the gala." He leaned against the doorway, thoughtful. "You don't owe me an apology." "I think I do," she said softly. "I made a joke at your expense." "You didn't deserve that?" He gave a small nod. "Apology accepted." She hesitated, glancing past him into the apartment. It was tidy, modest. A bookshelf lined with old records, a small keyboard in the corner. "You live alone?" "My sister's in nursing school," he said. "She stays here when she's not at the dorm. Why?" "For you played like someone who's been doing it his whole life," she said. "Where did you learn?" He smiled faintly. "My mom cleaned houses for a woman who used to teach piano. I'd sit in the corner while they talked, listening to lessons. She noticed one day and started teaching me after hours, free of charge." Amelia stepped inside slowly, her heels clicking softly on the floor. "You never pursued it professionally?" "I tried," he said. "Auditioned for conservatories, played at bars, small events. But life doesn't always care about talent. Rent had to be paid," she nodded quietly. "And now you mop marble floors for people who don't even look at you." He chuckled. "I don't mind. There's dignity in honest work." Her eyes softened. "You sound like my father. He built this company from nothing, but you'd never know it from how I run it now." David looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe you just forgot what it feels like to build something yourself." The words landed heavier than he intended, but Amelia didn't seem offended, just thoughtful. "Maybe," she said quietly. He gestured toward the small keyboard. "You play?" She laughed softly. "Barely. I took lessons as a kid. I was impatient, thought music was about showing off. Then I met someone who proved me wrong." He smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is," she said. "Do you still play often?" "When I can," he said. "Mostly for myself. I play late at night sometimes, helps clear my head." She hesitated before asking, "Would you play something now?" He raised an eyebrow. "For you?" "For me," she said, her tone gentle. He sat at the keyboard and began to play a soft melody, slower this time, delicate, like a memory unfolding. Amelia stood by the window, watching the late sunlight spill across the floor as the music filled the small apartment. For the first time in years, she didn't think about money or work or image. She just listened. When he finished, there was silence. "You make it sound like breathing," she said quietly. He smiled. "Music's just conversation without words." She turned to him. "Would you ever consider performing again, professionally?" He shook his head. "That life's not for me anymore." "But it should be," she said, stepping closer. "You could play anywhere. People would listen." "I'm not sure people care about truth in sound anymore," he said simply. "They would if they heard you," she insisted. He studied her expression, her sincerity, her unfamiliar humility, and for a moment, he almost believed her. When she left that evening, the air outside was cooling, the sky streaked pink and grey. As she stepped into her car, Kara called from the office. "So Amelia, the board's asking if you'll attend the European Summit next month." She looked back at the apartment windows, faint light glowing behind the curtains. "Tell them I might have other plans." "Other plans?" "Yes," she said softly. "Something worth listening to." That night she sat awake in her penthouse, staring at the grand piano in her living room. It had been untouched for years. She opened the lid, pressed one key and listened as the note lingered into silence. Then she smiled. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone in her own home. She knew it then. That wasn't the last time she'd see David Lawson. It was only the beginning. The following week, Amelia Harrington's world began to shift, quietly at first. Her mornings still began with meetings and calls, but her thoughts drifted often. Every time she passed the grand piano in her office or saw a polished marble floor, she thought of David, his calm composure, his honesty, his music. It unsettled her, but not in a bad way. It was the kind of unease that happens when a truth finally takes root. When the company's PR director entered her office that Thursday, Amelia was staring at the piano again. "Amelia?" he said. "Sorry to interrupt, but the Foundation's next gala is approaching. The board wants to feature a major performance, something that feels fresh and meaningful." "Meaningful?" she repeated absently. "Yes, the last few events felt mechanical. Her eyes lingered on the piano. "What if," she said slowly, "we showcased someone unexpected?" The director frowned. "Unexpected how?" "Someone real. Not famous, not rehearsed to perfection. Just real." He tilted his head. "Who do you have in mind?" Amelia smiled slightly. "Leave that to me." That evening she drove to the east side again. David opened the door with the same calm expression. "Ms. Harrington," he said. "Didn't expect you twice in 1 week," she smiled. "That makes 2 of us." He stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the smell of coffee and faint traces of soap filled the air. He'd been cleaning, and a soft tune played from a small speaker, and something classical. "I have a favor to ask," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "A favor?" She nodded. "I want you to perform at our next charity gala, not as staff, as the featured musician." He blinked, caught off guard. "You're serious?" "Completely," she said. "It's next month." "Same venue, same piano." He laughed softly. "The same piano that started all this. The very one," she said. "This time, no jokes, no conditions. Just you, the music, and a room full of people who need to hear it." He looked thoughtful. "Why me?" She hesitated. "Because you reminded me what beauty sounds like when it isn't trying to impress anyone. I've spent years surrounded by noise, business, ego, applause, and none of it mattered. But that night when you played, everything stopped. I think people need that again." He studied her for a moment. "You really believe they'll listen?" "I know they will," she said quietly. David exhaled slowly. "All right, but I'll need a week off work to prepare. Can your company handle that?" She smiled. "I think I can make that happen." Over the next few weeks, Amelia found herself visiting more often, sometimes to plan, sometimes just to listen. He practiced at a community center after his shifts, and she'd sit in the back of the small auditorium, letting the music fill the space. It wasn't just technical skill that drew her in. It was the way he played, like every note carried a memory. One evening, as he finished a piece, she said softly, "You make it look effortless." He smiled. "It's never effortless, but it's honest," she nodded. "You ever think about what your life could have been if someone had discovered you earlier?" He looked at her. "Maybe I wasn't meant to be discovered. Maybe I was meant to find peace first." The simplicity of his answer humbled her. For years she'd chased recognition like oxygen. But David lived differently, steady, balanced, at peace with not being seen. The night of the gala arrived like déjà vu. The ballroom shimmered under chandeliers again, the same crowd dressed in tailored suits and glittering gowns. Cameras flashed. Conversations buzzed. But this time Amelia's attention wasn't on the guests. As the lights dimmed, she took the microphone. "Before we begin," she said, her voice calm but sure, "I want to introduce someone whose talent speaks for itself. A man who reminds us that greatness doesn't always come wrapped in wealth or reputation." There were murmurs. A few guests exchanged puzzled looks. Then the spotlight shifted to the piano. David stepped forward wearing a simple black suit. "No tuxedo, no stage persona, just dignity." He sat, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands on the keys. When he began to play, the room changed. This time it wasn't a test. It was a gift. The melody moved gently at first, then swelled into something that felt alive. A conversation between strength and tenderness. People stopped mid-drink, mid-whisper. The servers froze in place. Even those who didn't understand music felt something stir. There was pain in it, and joy, and a kind of forgiveness that didn't need words. By the time the final chord faded, half the guests were on their feet. The applause rose like a wave, thunderous and genuine. Cameras flashed again, but no one looked away from him. Amelia stood near the back, tears shining in her eyes. She clapped quietly, then louder, until the entire hall followed her lead. When David stood, he didn't bow dramatically. He simply smiled, nodded once, and stepped back. After the crowd dispersed, Amelia approached him near the stage. "You did it," she said softly. He smiled. "No, we did." "You gave me the space." She shook her head. "All I did was listen." "That's more than most people ever do," he said. She looked at him, the noise of the ballroom fading around them. "You know, I meant it when I said your music stopped everything for me. It made me see people again," he smiled gently. "Then maybe that was the point." They stood there for a moment, the echoes of applause still lingering. It wasn't attraction or sentimentality that bound them. It was recognition. Two people who had learned in very different ways. That dignity doesn't depend on where you start, and worth isn't measured in what the world sees. When she returned to her office the next morning, Amelia found flowers on her desk. A simple bouquet with a handwritten note. It read, "Thank you for hearing me." Dee, she smiled, placed the flowers in a vase and sat by the window. Outside, the city was alive with movement, noise, and light. But in her heart, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that only truth can leave behind. And she knew something with absolute certainty. The man she once teased had changed her life without trying. Months passed after the gala, but the echoes of that night never fully faded. The video of David's second performance spread faster than the first. It appeared on news segments, music blogs, and social media feeds around the world. Unknown janitor stuns billionaire audience. From maintenance worker to maestro. Proof that genius can wear any uniform. David avoided the spotlight, but the world refused to forget him. Invitations poured in, talk shows, interviews, concert halls. He turned down most of them. When asked why, he'd simply say, "I already played for the people who needed to hear it." Amelia, meanwhile, found her own life changing in ways she hadn't planned. Her company's culture began to shift. She started mentoring younger employees, listening more than she spoke. People noticed that the CEO who once ruled every room now greeted janitors by name, asked how their families were doing, and stayed late to hear their ideas. When a journalist asked her what inspired the change, she smiled and said, "A man who taught me that respect costs nothing, but it can buy you a better soul." One Friday afternoon, months after the gala, Amelia visited the community center, where David volunteered teaching music to local kids. The sound of pianos filled the halls, clumsy but joyful notes bouncing off the walls. He looked up when she walked in. "Miss Harrington," he said, smiling. "Oh, finally came. I told you I would," she replied. He gestured toward the children. "They're still learning the difference between loud and alive." She smiled. "You're good with them." "They remind me why I started playing," he said. "Back when music wasn't about proving anything." She watched him for a while as he helped a young boy find the right chord. The patience in his voice, the kindness in his posture, it was the kind of teaching that couldn't be learned, only lived. When the class ended, they sat on the old piano bench together. The keys were chipped, the wood scratched, but it didn't matter. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about what you said that night and about listening." He smiled. "It changes things, doesn't it?" "Everything," she said. "I used to fill silence with noise because I thought it meant control. Now I understand that silence lets meaning grow." He looked at her thoughtfully. "You know, for someone who used to run the loudest company in the city, you're getting pretty good at quiet." She laughed softly. "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to protect." They sat in companionable silence for a while. Finally, she said, "There's something I'd like to do for you. I've been working with a few foundations. We want to create a scholarship for kids who can't afford music education. I'd like to name it after your mother." He blinked, taken aback. "My mother? She gave you music," Amelia said. "It feels right." He looked down, swallowing hard. "She'd have liked that." They shared a long pause, filled with something unspoken but understood. Gratitude, mutual respect. The quiet peace that comes when two people's lives cross for a reason neither expected but both needed. In the months that followed, the Lawson Foundation for Musical Hope launched with donations from around the world. David continued to teach, occasionally performing at small community concerts. Amelia attended everyone she could. She didn't sit in the front row. She always chose a seat in the back, where she could listen in stillness. And every time he played, she heard not just music, but memory, the sound of dignity reclaiming its place in the world. Years later, when journalists wrote about her legacy, they mentioned the skyscrapers, the business empire, the philanthropy. But when Amelia herself was asked which accomplishment meant the most, she always said, "A night when I listened instead of laughed." For David, the story was simpler. When someone asked him about the billionaire who discovered him, he'd smile and correct them gently. "She didn't discover me," he'd say. "She remembered me." The way people remember something they'd forgotten about themselves. He kept her old business card tucked inside the worn cover of his music notebook. Not as a token of fame, but as a reminder that compassion can cross any distance. Between wealth and work, pride and humility, silence and song. And sometimes, when he sat alone at the piano in the quiet of the evening, he would smile faintly, his fingers gliding across the keys, playing the melody that had started it all, the one that had once silenced a room and softened a heart. In that music lived everything he had ever wanted to say: forgiveness, grace, and the truth that art, like kindness, belongs to everyone. Outside, the city lights shimmered through the window, and somewhere in the distance a piano played into the night.